This is Eyewitness News up close with Bill Ritter.
And to faithfully discharge my duties
as Police Commissioner of the City of New York,
as Police Commissioner of the City of New York,
to the best of my abilities.
to the best of my abilities.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Dermot Shea, sworn in this past week as the 44th Police Commissioner of New York City. He was chosen by Mayor de Blasio to replace Jimmy O'Neill for one of the toughest jobs, not just in New York City, but in the country. So what now? Now that he's in charge of the biggest police department in America. Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Up Close. I'm Bill Ritter. It is arguably the highest profile local law enforcement job in the country. And from the time Dermot Shea became chief of detectives at the NYPD 3 years ago, he has shown he can handle a high-profile job. He's no stranger to talking in public and on camera about police news that's not always great news for the police, sometimes, for the public, other times. He has a humble streak that reflects his rather humble beginnings, he says. Shea, the son of Irish immigrants, his father worked as a handyman, his mother a stay-at-home parent to Shea and 4 other kids. At one point, all of them living in a one-bedroom apartment in Sunnyside, Queens. Commissioner Shea went to college, got an economics degree, but he decided to go to the police academy, where he graduated in the top 10% of his class and became a cop in 1991.
Majored in economics, went on some interviews, and quickly made the decision that I didn't see myself sitting behind a desk. I was pulled towards policing, if you will, and never looked back and loved every minute of it. I think back to my time. I started in the 4-6 precinct up in the Bronx in 1991, and city was a different time back then, and it was a neighborhood that was going through a tough period of time, and I really frequently think back to what good people were there and how much they needed the cops.
That was the 4-6 precinct in the Bronx he was talking about. Shea has held high-ranking positions in the NYPD for the last 5.5 years, the latest chief of detectives before he became NYPD commissioner on December 1st. And with 1 week under his belt, Commissioner Shea joins us this morning for his first appearance on Up Close, the first of many, I hope.
I hope as well, and good morning, and thank you for having me, Bill.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
What's the first week been like?
It's been a busy week, sworn in on Monday, officially in this ceremony, and certainly a lot of events, trying to get out to as many communities as possible, just to meet as many people, and also trying to set some agendas on the policing side back here at home.
And so that's what this is about. I mean, you're going out to public and making your case, right?
That's right, yeah, but also trying to put my stamp on the department. So there'll be some appointments that have taken place already this week with Chief Rodney Harrison taking over as Chief of Detectives, Chief Fausto Picciotto, 2 individuals that I respect and admire greatly, taking over as Chief of Patrol. I've spent the day today really ironing out a further part of the team, if you will, that's going to be the legacy of the next 2 years in terms of what my police department looks like.
And you say, putting your stamp on it, the 2 chiefs you appointed, 2 ethnic minorities that look a lot like the communities you serve.
Yeah, and they do, but more importantly, they're good men. They're men that have leadership qualities. They get what we're trying to do here in New York City. They're fierce crime fighters, but at the same token, they understand that if we want to get where we're trying to get to in New York City, it's got to be with all of the communities working with us together, not just the police trying to fight crime. How do we get the public involved more? So Rodney and Fausto truly do get it, and I think they're going to be great additions to the team.
So as you try to figure out how to put your stamp on this department, the biggest in the country, and on the stamp on the department's relationship to the community, you have to learn a lot about this job too, because you were in charge as chief of detectives, 6,000 detectives?
Roughly 6,000 personnel. Yeah.
High profile job. You know, it's a prestigious job, chief of detectives.
It certainly was.
But this is a very different job. You're not in uniform. That's your uniform, suit and tie. And you have to figure out how to run the biggest police department in the country.
That's right.
Not easy, I assume.
With little room for error, which you didn't mention. But this is such a humbling experience to be put in charge of this agency with everything this agency represents, the history of it, and the enormity of the responsibility is not lost on me. And that's what really I keep gravitating back towards. How many people count on the police department? How important, day in and day out, the work the men and women of this police department, the interactions with the public, how much it means. So we don't have a lot of luxury to get things wrong, if you will. And that's why this first week was critically important to me, Bill, to really get the right people in the right positions.
You know,
and I think we're moving towards that.
When your predecessor, Commissioner O'Neill, his first day on the job, there was a terrorist attack.
That's right.
And you didn't have that, you know, knock on wood. But you are learning things, I assume, that have surprised you, maybe, so far?
Well, so you mentioned the last 5 or 6 years, I've been a part of the executive team and part of briefings with Commissioner O'Neill when he was here, with Chief of Department Terry Monahan and others. So in terms of what's going on in New York City, we were certainly part of those briefings already. Not too many surprises there. I will tell you that the schedule has been a bit more hectic. Jimmy O'Neill warned me about that.
He said 24/7 when he
said
it when he was on the job and when he was leaving.
And he meant it. And he meant it. And just that's the importance, though. You have to be out there. You have to be constantly connecting. People want to see the police commissioner. It's in terms of a policing job. It's somewhat, in my opinion, crossing a line into a public figure more than just a policing figure. So it's very important to me to get out there, to be seen by the police officers, to be seen by the community as well.
One of the things that Jimmy O'Neill complained about, I shouldn't say complained, he didn't complain. He talked about it, but he talked so personally about it that he said the 24/7 part of it is even when you're trying to relax, and I know he went and rode his bicycle to get a little stress reduction and played hockey, he always had, you know, some communication device, and he was aware of every crime in every borough and every neighborhood of the city, and I assume you have the same thing.
It is, that is the experience. That's not unfamiliar to me as Chief of Detectives. In these positions that we hold, in how we police this city in 2019 with the entire CompStat process. I'll tell you, it's not just the police commissioner. It's down through the executive ranks, through the precinct commanders that are running commands. I think the public would be really impressed with the dedication the men and women show. And they begin and end their day with those phones, with those emails, reviewing crimes, what's happening in any part of the city, or really for that matter, different parts of the country and world that might affect the residents of this city, and constantly taking information in and acting on it.
Before we get into the weeds of what you want to do, you were in a 3-week transition period, 4-week transition period,
roughly,
where you had your predecessor and you were both there, and I know you're friendly and you have great respect for each other, but it was an interesting transition period because you didn't really have the power, but everyone knew you will have the power in just a couple of weeks. How did that work, and how did it prepare you for?
I'll tell you the one thing where it really helped me a lot, because this is an agency of roughly 55,000 people, and clearly I think Jimmy's done very well. Bill Bratton before him. I have tremendous respect for these individuals. But with that being said, I want to put my own mark on this agency and things that I noticed that I'd like to pursue a little different path. And I had the advantage of working in this agency for nearly 29 years. I know the personnel. So the last couple of weeks really gave me a leg up in terms of mapping out my strategy for what's important, what we're going to do the next 2 years, what are we going to attempt to do for the citizens of this city, and then who's going to be in what roles. And it's allowed me in this last 4 days to move pretty rapidly because I had that background.
How much of that is inside baseball, and how much of that are things that our audience would want to know about?
At this point, most of it is still inside baseball, but I will tell you within the next couple days, definitely within a week, there'll be some announcements made. There were 2 announcements this week in terms of Fausto Pichardo and Rodney Harrison. There'll be multiple other moves that I think is going to put us in a great position to succeed moving forward.
And do you think that will put your stamp on this?
I do.
And when you looked at how your predecessors did it, what specifically do you want to do differently than they did?
Well, I think that the luxury of this department is we have tremendous personnel. I mean, we are
it's a small city.
A well-resourced department in terms of resources, but the strength is not the equipment, it's not the technology. All of that is very good. We really have great people working up and down through this organization on the civilian and the uniform side. So certainly I view things a little differently through my lens, many commonalities with my predecessors, but in terms of what I want to do, probably slightly different. Always with the common theme, though, keeping New Yorkers safe.
You're the first commissioner who hasn't been a baby boomer, and that's an interesting change generationally, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I probably bridged the gap somewhat. When you look at the turnover in the police department as a whole, I'm now starting to be viewed as one of the older people. If you
It happens quickly, Commissioner.
If you can believe that, but I kind of bridged the gap between some individuals that might be a little bit older than me, and then we have police officers and civilians coming on that are just out of college.
Let me talk about what the public cares about, I think, a lot of this stuff, and they're going to look at the low crime rates in New York, and
Yep.
it has been, you bill it as the safest big city in America. And yet this year, you said this past week, it's going to go, the murders will go up apparently above 300 for the first time in several years. Murders rate up by 8.5%, 8.7%.
Yeah.
That's got to be troubling to you. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, well, I think two things here. You look at the large picture of where we are and where we've gotten. We are in a good place in crime in New York City, if you look historically. But with that being said, we are a very stubborn agency. I ran CompStat for 4 or 5 years. And we don't look at crime statistics as numbers. We look at them as people. So when you start talking about one individual robbed, one individual that's a victim of a terrible sexual assault or a homicide, God forbid, we take that to heart. So at the same time that we can be proud of where we stand today in 2019 in New York City with one of the lowest murder rates in the country for a large city, any time that we're not moving it even lower, we're frustrated and we're concerned.
What percentage of these murders, and I know you want to see it go lower, but
Yep.
you're right, still a pretty low rate given the size of the city. What percentage are taking part, are responsible for gangs? How much are gangs responsible for this? I know half of the
Yep.
murders are from guns,
Yep.
and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but what percentage are from gangs?
So when you look at shooting incidents, not murders, roughly 45% at a minimum is gang related. And I say at a minimum because unfortunately we're in the situation where oftentimes we'll have a shooting incident and we have less than compliant individuals telling us what happened. But we can definitively put our stamp on, we know that that incident was gang related at least 45% of the time on shootings. It's not that high on homicides. When you look at homicides, certainly about 20–25% are gang related. But then you start coming into situations such as domestic, some other traffic related ones that maybe a fire this week. We just had a terrible incident where somebody set a fire and 3 people died. So it tends to be a smaller percentage on the homicide side. On the shooting side, about close to 50%.
Gangs related.
Yep.
So much to talk to you about. Stick around for another segment.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll
I'd love
continue our discussion with the new NYPD Commissioner, Dermot Shea, when we come right back. Welcome back to Up Close. Continue our conversation with the newly sworn-in Commissioner of the NYPD, Dermot Shea. I want to get right to a story that happened on Friday. And we found out about it really because you tweeted it. You're
Yep.
quite prolific on social media. You were as chief of detectives. I assume you're going to be as commissioner.
I have to catch up, but I plan on it, yes.
Okay.
I think it's a great way to connect.
Directly
Yep.
to the citizens you serve. You took a picture of a sandwich at a deli served to a cop, and it has a razor blade in it.
Yeah, pretty frightening.
Right, and of course what it seemed like was that someone targeted this cop.
So whatever happened in this incident, clearly, whether it's a police officer or a private citizen,
Not good.
not good. And think of a child that's potentially biting into that sandwich. So we have an active investigation going on as we speak to determine exactly what transpired. Was it an intentional act? Was it something that slipped in? But at the end of the day, I think that we would all agree that whatever happened here can't happen again. Thankfully, the officer is okay.
Is okay. Possibly it might have been just an accident? That's possible?
That possibility is also not ruled out at this time.
Okay. Let me talk to you a little bit about how you get along with Mayor de Blasio. You serve at his pleasure. He's up for his term's going to end in a couple years. That means your term could end in a couple of years,
sooner.
Right, depending. But the average commissioner lasts, with Ray Kelly not being the exception, lasts only about 3 years in New York City anyway.
That's right. That's right.
What's your relationship like with the mayor?
So I got to know him early on in 2014. I got a call one day from come up and see Commissioner Bratton, and that was in January of 2014. And that call really turned my career sideways in terms of when I was then appointed as Deputy Commissioner Operations, and in that role, running CompStat, part of the executive staff, quickly got to meet and participate and take part in meetings with not only the executive staff of the police department, but then Mayor de Blasio. So I've known him and participated in meetings and strategy sessions since really 2014 with them.
Could you have imagined then you were going to become commissioner 5 years later?
No, this is
Probably
something
not.
that is something that took me by surprise.
One thing that's going to happen come January 1st is that New York State has a brand new criminal reform law, bail reform, and a whole slew of other things that are going to challenge your department. No matter how you feel about the bail reform, and I'm sure that I've heard you talk about it, you say you're optimistic that this is going to work and everything else, but this is a very different world we're going to live in starting January 1st.
It is. There's some significant changes as part of that. First and foremost, I just want to get out, and I've said it publicly many times, the NYPD is for reform. We agree with many parts of this new law that's taking place January 1st, particularly the cash bail. We don't think it's right, and we've demonstrated through a lot of our policies that we've changed that individuals in jail for low offenses simply because they don't have money, we don't think that's right. What we are concerned about here, though, is that recidivist population that continuously games the system in and out and victimizing more people. So that's where we think that there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity to maybe tweak the law, make it a little more common sense, if you will, give judges some discretion to, on isolated incidents, identify individual people and say, that person there committed multiple crimes, given chances, back out. I think that anything we do here, we cannot forget the victim.
And if someone involves a gun in a crime, it's a different standard.
Well, there's parts of this law that unfortunately will put people back on the street, depending on the charges.
If you're trying to cut the crime rates,
it's a significant challenge. It's a significant challenge. I mean, I have the utmost confidence in the men and women of the NYPD, the detectives, the police officers that are out there on the front lines. We're a resilient organization. We'll do everything in our power to keep New Yorkers safe, but we're going to need everyone in this fight.
We only have a minute left, Commissioner, and I have a million questions to ask you, but one of the things that struck me is that tape we played, a sort of introductory tape of yours that the department produced. You talked about how you really believe that the police department is the voice of the victim. And I think that resonated and will resonate to a lot of New Yorkers.
I do believe it. I do. You know, there's a lot of advocacy groups out there, and we work with many of them. I think there's an opportunity possibly to be some advocacy groups needed here for the victims. You know, that's something that I'll take away forever and cherish from the Detective Bureau, that long after the news story runs, and you'll appreciate this, Bill, the newspaper headlines are done, those detectives are working those cases still. We had a case just this week where homicide detectives in Brooklyn South made a case that occurred on July 4th. They haven't forgotten those victims. And I think it's important that everyone in New York City remembers that. Every change that we make to a law here, if it makes sense to do, that's a great thing. But let's not put things into place that has unintended consequences for residents walking down the street in Queens or Brooklyn without taking that into the equation too.
Well, a lot of different kind of people here in New York, all political stripes, all social stripes, but I think everyone's wishing you good luck.
Thank you very much.
Dermot Shea, the new commissioner of the NYPD. Come back to Up Close.
Thank you very much. Anytime.
So. All right. I'm going to tell your people that anytime. Thank you, Commissioner. Just ahead, we're going to talk about impeachment and the disturbing question that so many are asking. Is this painful process really what the country must do, or is it hurting the Democrats' chances of defeating President Trump next November? Lots of other questions as well we discuss with our political analysts next. Welcome back to Up Close. Have you been watching the impeachment hearings? Imagine this. What if a Republican in Congress says something like, you know what the president did was so wrong, but I don't think it's worth impeaching him? Or what if a Democrat said the same thing? It's kind of impossible to imagine because it seems, and it is, in fact, that both sides are just set in their corners. And all this seems like sort of a fait accompli, destined to play out with the Democratic-controlled House voting to impeach and the Republican-controlled Senate voting to acquit. Joining us to discuss this and more, political consultant Hank Sheinkoff here in New York, and in Washington, ABC News political director Rick Klein. Rick, you and your troops covered this all the time. Is it a fait accompli?
Pretty much. Look, we're now moving there. Nancy Pelosi has launched her committee chairs to start writing their articles of impeachment. There is no turning back. We know that the vote is going to happen. It's almost certainly going to happen before Christmas. And I think we can fairly predict what the vote to acquit will look like in the Senate as well. So we are watching this kind of in slow motion, but I think we know how the movie's going to end.
Hank, what would the founders of this country be thinking about the debate that is being had here? You just heard the political director of ABC who says, yeah, it's a fait accompli. So the founders then listening to this debate, well, you know, maybe the Democrats shouldn't have done this because it could hurt them, it could help Trump. Trump's thinking, go ahead, get this over with quick because I want to get into the Senate.
It's essentially violative of what the founders had in their minds. They didn't want to have factionalism. They didn't want to have Americans going at each other. They wanted to have a United States of America, and that's exactly what we don't have. We have a Republican Party that is largely regionally based and race-based. We have a Democratic Party that is moving further to the left, and the great chasm in the middle ought to give people some pause and think about this for a second. This is exactly what the founders did not want.
I want to get in the weeds a little bit more about what's going on, but do you think we ever get back?
It's going to be very hard. Very, very hard. We'll need a national crisis that people can rally around, which we had, called the Second World War, called the Kennedy assassination, called the Great Society, called the Civil Rights Movement, which forced people together. But the central government took the role in each of those events.
Rick, I watched the various coverages this last week of how Nancy Pelosi did and performed in her press conference and how she got angry at the end. And if you watched a certain cable news network, they said she had a complete meltdown, echoing what the president described it. And if you watched other news programs, she got very angry and kind of was filled with righteous indignation at a question she thought was inappropriate from an arch conservative represented newspaper news service reporter. It's like a Rorschach test, right? Which is the truth.
Truly. I think Nancy Pelosi throughout this process has known exactly what she's doing. And I think she has been extremely cautious in approaching the issue of impeachment. She didn't want to do this. She did it reluctantly, and I actually think that's genuine. I think she reflected some of the frustration, some of the anger that a lot of Democrats have felt during the Trump era. We saw flashes of that on the campaign trail with Joe Biden telling off a voter in Iowa. I feel like there's a temptation that a lot of folks have in these days to meet the fire with some more fire and to respond in kind. Maybe it feels good, maybe it doesn't, but I feel like it is genuine when it's happening. There is just a lot of anger out there, and I think in that case, Nancy Pelosi really pushed to the brink on a whole lot of areas, was just reflecting that frustration.
She is the hero of the moment, not just for the Democrats, for the country. She's trying to put this in order. Rick's right. She obviously did not want to have this process happen. She's trying to protect the Constitution. And the attack on her yesterday that allowed her to bring religion into the discussion was rather important, because it made it less about politics and more about morality from the Democrats' perspective.
If this is, gentlemen, a fait accompli involving President Trump, what does it mean for a certain former mayor of New York and the personal lawyer of the president, because he seems to be hip deep in all this? Rick?
No, I think Rudy Giuliani is in real potential legal trouble in the Southern District of New York. There's going to be intense scrutiny on him, and I don't think he'll find a lot of friends in the Trump administration of the White House. It may be Rudy Giuliani who fears most the prospect of a big public impeachment trial in the Senate, because I can imagine a whole lot of people wanting to back up over the bus over Rudy rather than try to take on the president.
Hank, you've watched him for decades. I'm going to ask you how he got here, but my instinct is that he ran his business with international contacts and business associates just like this.
When he was at White & Case, before he became the mayor, in between the period after he left the U.S. Attorney's Office, he had dealt with international figures. That firm did a lot of it. It's not new. He built a successful business. The question is, why did he do these things? Different question. Power.
Well, yes, and doesn't power get everybody up?
Power gets everybody crazy. It's the great seducer and the great destroyer.
Let me talk to both of you in the minute we have left about the Democrats for a second. Talk about Michael Bloomberg and what's happening with the Joe Biden devolution. No, he's up in the polls. Rick?
Yeah, it's a remarkable thing. For as much angst as there's been over his candidacy, there's been resiliency in the polling numbers. His people are as confident as ever. They like the fact that other people are turning their fire on people like Mayor Pete Buttigieg. They don't view anyone as that much of a threat. They think that Kamala Harris's exit from the race opens up African American voters even more for them in the South. So the Biden campaign feels pretty good in this moment in time.
Bloomberg chances?
I think that I was wrong about Joe Biden on this program. I think I said he looked to be falling apart, when in fact, if you look at his performance yesterday with the heckler, he's tougher than ever. Mike Bloomberg, hey, look, 6 months ago, there was a guy from a state that doesn't have a lot of population with a name we couldn't pronounce. There's the mayor of a city that very few of us go to, who suddenly wound up in the top tier candidate. His name was Buttigieg.
Yes.
Don't count out Mike Bloomberg.
Mayor of South Bend, because he has a lot of money, Mr. Bloomberg does.
Well, he's dominating the message argument, and the message sticks, and hopefully it'll attach to the candidate.
Hank Scheinkoff, Rick Klein, gentlemen, thank you both once again for being on Up Close. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Bill.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Up Close. Tiempo with Joe Torres is next. If you missed any of today's programs, I'm going to post today's segments on my Facebook page tomorrow, so no worries. Thank you all for watching. I'm Bill Ritter, and for all of us here at Channel 7, enjoy the rest of your weekend.